What if I told you that there's a secret chemical formula hidden in this image from over 400 years ago? This illustration was found in an alchemical book that was published in the early 1600s. Let's take a closer look at what's going on here. Two men are brandishing swords at each other, one with a snake wrapped around the blade and the other with a bird perched on the end. Between them is a winged man who's also standing upon a pair of wings. He's wearing a crown and holding two staffs with snakes entwined around them. Above his head is a strange symbol, and on either side of him is the sun and the moon. But what does this all mean? To find out, I spoke to the man who has spent his career studying the history of alchemy, which has allowed him to decode many of its secret experiments, and even recreate them in his own laboratory. This is Professor Lawrence Principe, author of the absolutely brilliant book, The Secrets of Alchemy. In this video, we're going to learn how Professor Principe was able to find a hidden chemical recipe which, once deciphered, tells you how to synthesize the crown jewel of alchemy, the Philosopher's Stone, which, as legend has it, has the power to transform base metals into gold. The art of alchemy was shrouded in mystery for centuries. Rather than publishing clear, detailed laboratory procedures, alchemists preferred to hide their work in the forms of cryptic symbols, fantastical art, and even poetry and music. Looking at some of these magnificent images, it's easy to see why they're so compelling.
They engage all of your senses. You're reading the text, you're looking at the picture, you're thinking about it. And so it's not only the allure of making the Philosopher's Stone and making gold, it's the allure of deciphering a secret. It's the intellectual game of trying to interpret an allegory and an emblem. So they're super. They're both puzzle books and treasure maps at the same time.
This image comes from a famous alchemical book called The 12 Keys of Basil Valentine, which might be my favorite name of all time. So the next question is, how do we decode these bizarre images? Well, let's go through the 3 skills you'll need to know to be able to read these images like a true alchemist. Skill number 1, understanding alchemical thinking. Okay, so back in the 17th century, alchemists recognized 7 metals: gold, silver, copper, iron, tin, lead, and mercury. They called 2 of them, gold and silver, noble because of their resistance to corrosion, their beauty, and their rarity. They labeled the remaining 5 base or ignoble metals. So how could one convert a base metal into a noble metal?
There were quite robust theories behind transmutation. So, for example, one of them is the idea that all the metals look more or less the same. They're shiny, they're malleable, they melt, and so forth. That's because they share ingredients in common. And by the 9th century, the idea was that those 2 ingredients were called mercury and sulfur. And the different metals resulted from different purities of mercury and sulfur, different proportions mixed together, different ways in which they were mixed together, whether by a tight connection or a loose connection. And so if you think about that, what that means is that all the metals are made out of the same 2 ingredients, just in different proportions, different purities. Therefore, the base materials for all the metals are present in all of them. And so you just have to adjust the proportions or adjust the purity or adjust the way they're put together to turn one metal into another. And so in that sense, it becomes a very simple operation, theoretically, if not practically, to transmute one metal into another.
It was thought that the Philosopher's Stone was an elusive substance that would have the ability to facilitate this transformation.
The Philosopher's Stone, the general idea was this was a substance that you prepared in the laboratory in 2 different forms, a white form and a red form. And a red form was just more mature than the white form. In other words, you kept it in the heat longer. The white form, take a small bit of it, throw it onto, say, boiling mercury or a molten metal, and it should transmute it in a few minutes into silver. The red one, do the same thing, it would transmute those same metals into gold.
So if we keep this goal in mind of producing the Philosopher's Stone to facilitate the transmutation of base metals into noble metals, it will give us a better understanding of alchemical imagery. But what practical tools did alchemists actually have to create the Philosopher's Stone? Well, this brings us on to skill number 2, understanding alchemical techniques. Over the centuries, in their quest for the Philosopher's Stone, alchemists developed numerous techniques that modern chemists still use today. Things like dissolving in acids, filtering solids from liquids, distillation of solutions, precipitation of insoluble salts, even heating things in a water bath, which you may have done yourself while cooking, was invented by an ancient alchemist called Maria Hebrea, giving us the name Maria's bath, although it's more commonly referred to in French, bain-marie. Other techniques include things like sublimation, heating a solid to drive off any volatile components, then condensing them in a separate vessel. They also use things like fermentation, alloying, and amalgamation. Skilled alchemists were adept with all of these techniques, so some of these processes will likely be hidden in the images we're going to look at. But how do they hide them? Well, this brings us on to skill number 3, understanding Decknamen. This is a German word that's commonly used when analyzing alchemical texts, and it translates to code names. Alchemists use Decknamen everywhere in their writings. The secrecy surrounding alchemy prevented its practitioners from giving clear instructions on how to follow in their footsteps, so rather than mentioning the actual name of a substance, they'd refer to it using Decknamen. But why? Why all this secrecy to hide their work?
Think about it. If you figure out how to make the Philosopher's Stone, you can turn the plumbing in your house into gold. You can turn the lead on your roof into gold. You can turn the coins in your pocket that are copper into gold. You would completely destroy the economy. So this is really dangerous knowledge. You could gain a lot of power, and if a bad person gained that power, we would all be in very tough shape for someone who could just make gold at a whim. Rulers were aware of this problem. They were also aware of the problem that you could also make look-alike gold that would contaminate the gold supply of Europe. So starting in the 14th century, there were various laws passed against alchemy, usually to prevent counterfeiting, to prevent the corruption of the currency. And so at that point, alchemy starts going, in a sense, underground. It was still extraordinarily popular. We have, hundreds and hundreds of people practicing it and writing texts about it, but they start doing it in a much more secretive way.
A common example of Decknamen for the metals was using the name of a heavenly body. You see, throughout the alchemical period, 7 planets were known, and these were each attributed to one of the 7 known metals. So gold was of course the sun, and silver was of course the moon. But then copper was Venus, iron was Mars, tin was Jupiter, lead was Saturn, and Mercury was, well, Mercury. But since many different Decknamen could be used for a single substance, it made these books very difficult to decipher. So using these 3 skills, understanding alchemical thinking, understanding alchemical techniques, and understanding Decknamen, we're now ready to find the secrets hidden in these images. By the way, just a quick one, this video required a lot of research. At one point I had around 30 tabs open at once, which would have been extremely confusing except for the fact that I was using Opera as my browser, which has a load of cool features that are really helpful if you do a lot of research like I do. For one, it lets me group my tabs into collapsible tab islands. You can also drag up to 4 pages to create a split screen view with different possible layouts. To try it out for yourself for free, check out Opera using my link in the description. Okay, back to the video. In the 12 Keys of Basil Valentine, each chapter, or key, is a step in the process to make the Philosopher's Stone. Professor Principe said in his book that in the 12 keys, the text came first and the illustrations later. That is to say, in most original works that include allegorical images, the text is primary. So we can't just look at the images by themselves. We need to use them alongside the text in order to truly understand them. So let's start with the first key. What can you see? Well, there's what looks like a king and queen facing each other. In front of them, a wolf leaps over a fire, and next to it, another man is watching, holding a scythe. To decipher this, let's read the crucial part of the text that accompanies this image. The king's crown should be pure gold, and a chaste bride should be married to him. Take the ravenous grey wolf that on account of his name is subjected to bellicose Mars, but by birth is a child of old Saturn, and that lives in the valleys and mountains of the world and is possessed of great hunger. Throw the king's body before him that he may have his nourishment from it. And when he has devoured the king, then make a great fire and throw the wolf into it, so that he burns up entirely. Thus will the king be redeemed. If this is done thrice, then the lion has conquered the wolf, and nothing more to eat will be found in him. Thus is our body completed at the start of our work. Okay, let's see if we can decode this mysterious passage.
Well, fortunately, the 12 keys start out a little bit on the easy side, in that they use a Decknamen, that is cover names, that are pretty common by 1599. So it's not so hard to suss out what he's actually talking about. So the first one talks about the characters in this little drama are a king and a wolf and Saturn. So, okay, what are we? King. We're talking about alchemy. That's probably gold. Okay, that king of the metals. A gray wolf is a little harder unless you're really into the alchemical literature. He says it's an offspring of Saturn. Okay, well, Saturn. Saturn is the planet, of course, but each of the planets is connected to one of the metals, and Saturn is connected to lead. So you want something that's an offspring of lead, so it's something that's like lead, gets confused with lead. Well, if you know your mineralogy, you know that the mineral for lead is galena. There's a mineral that looks quite a lot like it, which is stibnite, which is actually an antimony ore. And once he starts talking about the king is made more glorious by this wolf, you realize that by 1599, it was a fairly well-known process to take gold, which in common commerce is alloyed with various metals. So a coin in your pocket would have some copper or silver in it. If you want to make it pure, you drop it into molten stibnite, molten antimony trisulfide, and the sulfur combines with the base metals, not with the gold, and so those base metals can be removed, and what you get at the end of the process is a purified gold.
Back in the 17th century, antimony ore, or stibnite, was thought to be related to lead due to its lead-grey colour. In his book, Professor Principe said, calling stibnite a ravenous wolf would make sense to anyone who has seen it react with metals. When melted, stibnite dissolves, devours, the metals with breathtaking speed. Corroboration comes from the hint, on account of his name, he is subjected to bellicose Mars. In German, the name for the mineral stibnite is Spießglanz, literally spear shine, in reference to its shiny, needle-like crystals. A spear, like all weapons, is subject to Mars, the god of war. So it seems like we figured out our first step. Professor Principe described what happened when he tried it out for himself. When a piece of impure gold is thrown into melted stibnite, it dissolves almost instantly. Metals other than gold are turned into sulfides that float to the surface. A brilliant white alloy of antimony and gold sinks to the bottom of the melt, where it is easily retrieved after the crucible has cooled. When this alloy, that is, the wolf with the king in his stomach, is roasted, make a great fire and throw the wolf into it, the antimony evaporates, leaving the purified gold behind. Now that the gold is pure, nothing more to eat will be found in him. Thus, the lion, king of beasts equals king of metals, has conquered the wolf. So this first key seems to suggest that we need to begin our process of producing the Philosopher's Stone by using stibnite to purify gold. How cool is that? We've managed to extract a working chemical procedure from this bizarre imagery. Considering all of this using alchemical thinking, this first step makes sense. We want to produce a mythical substance that has the power to transform base metals into gold. Without any modern chemical knowledge, a logical place to begin would be with some purified gold. Right, so now that we've got our purified gold from the first key, let's take a look at the second key, which is the image I showed at the beginning of the video. The text accompanying this key seems to be even weirder than the first, so let's buckle in. The relevant part of the text introduces a bridal pair, Apollo and Diana, Roman gods of the sun and moon respectively, so they most likely represent gold and silver. The text goes on to say, the precious water in which the bridegroom needs to have his bath must be made most cleverly and carefully from two fighters. It is not useful for the eagle to make his nest alone at the top of the Alps, for his young would freeze from the snow high up in the mountains. But when you introduce to the eagle the old dragon who has dwelt long among the rocks and who creeps in and out of the caves of the earth, and set the two upon a hellish seat, then Pluto will blow strongly and drive out from the cold dragon a flying fiery spirit whose great heat will burn up the feathers of the eagle, and prepare a steam bath, so that the snow on the highest mountains must melt entirely and turn into water, whereby the mineral bath is rightly prepared and can give the king good fortune and health. Okay, now I'd like to try an interesting experiment with all you chemistorians watching if you're feeling up to the challenge. Without knowing anything else, I'd like you to pause the video here and leave a comment below with your interpretation of this text. What was the chemical procedure Valentine was describing here? Don't worry if you're not sure about some of it or even any of it. The fun is in trying to figure it out. If you have any ideas at all, drop them below. Right, now let's see what Professor Principe has to say about the second key. The bridegroom's bath is a liquid prepared by the combat of the two fighters, also called eagle and dragon. These animals are shown on the combatants' swords. Fortunately, Valentine mentions an eagle once again elsewhere in the book. There he equates that eagle with salmiac, or sal ammoniac, a salt today called ammonium chloride. One of ammonium chloride's characteristic properties is that it sublimes easily. That is, upon mild heating, the salt vaporizes and then recondenses into a white salt in cooler parts of the flask. So just to add some context here, the reason that ammonium chloride sublimes is that when you heat it, it undergoes a reversible thermal decomposition to form two gases, ammonia and hydrogen chloride, which then rise to the cooler part of the flask, allowing them to react together to reform ammonium chloride. Right, back to Professor Principe's explanation. Given ammonium chloride's ability to sublime, eagle is an appropriate deckname for it. Both the salt and the bird fly through the air. The modern term volatilize derives from the Latin volare, to fly. Accordingly, the snow on the highest mountains must refer to the deposit of pure white sal ammoniac that collects at the top of the vessel when the salt sublimes. Identifying the dragon requires some knowledge of mineralogy. The fact that it lives in caves and around stones suggests saltpeter, potassium nitrate, a salt found naturally as a crystalline deposit on cave walls, and in the stone foundations of stables. The remark that the dragon is cold further hints at saltpeter, for it tastes cool on the tongue, and it perceptibly lowers the temperature of water as it dissolves. Finally, a flying, fiery spirit can be driven out of saltpeter by heat. We call it nitric acid, which clinches the identification. Okay, so we figured out that the eagle symbolizes sal ammoniac, aka ammonium chloride, and the dragon symbolizes saltpeter, aka potassium nitrate. So how do we use them? Professor Principe tells us. When ammonium chloride and potassium nitrate are mixed, introduced to the eagle the old dragon, placed in a retort in a furnace, a hellish seat, and heated strongly, Pluto, god of hell, starts to blow, a vigorous reaction, a fight, does ensue, and a highly corrosive acid distills over. This mineral bath is a type of aqua regia, an acid mixture capable of dissolving gold. The accompanying image shows Mercury positioned between the fighters and standing on wings. The sense here seems to be that the medium between the fighters is a winged Mercury, that is, a liquid that flies out from the fighting salts. Let me know in the comments how close you got to this interpretation. I'll be completely honest, I had no idea, so I was fascinated by Professor Principe's analysis. Right, so we've got our purified gold and our aqua regia. Let's take a look at the third key. In this image, a fearsome dragon lies in the foreground, and behind it, it looks like a wolf is fighting with a couple of birds. The relevant part of the text for the third key begins, "Our fiery sulfur must be prepared for this art and conquered with water, so that the king is utterly shattered and made invisible, but his visible form must this time appear again." Now, on first glance, it seems like Valentine is introducing a new element to the mix here, sulfur. However, Professor Principe believes that this is actually another deckname for gold, due to the natural yellow color of sulfur. The water that's used to conquer the sulfur, aka gold, is a reference to the aqua regia that we prepared in the second key. So here, we need to dissolve our purified gold in the aqua regia, so that the king is utterly shattered and made invisible, which will give us a solution of a compound called gold chloride. But then, where it says that his visible form must this time appear again, It implies that the solution should be evaporated to leave behind a solid residue of gold chloride. Valentine continues, "He who would prepare our unburnable sulfur of all the sages must take care to seek out our sulfur in something where it is unburnable, which cannot be done unless the salty sea has swallowed the corpse and then entirely spit it out once again." Here, the sulfur of all the sages is a title for the Philosopher's Stone itself. This part of the text is asking us to take our corpse, which is the gold chloride residue, and redissolve it in the salty sea, which is our aqua regia. Then we need to distill it once again to once again spit it out. This is when things get weird.
The third of the key seems to be dealing with something like the sublimation of gold, of making gold volatile. Well, if you think about gold, it's one of the least volatile substances you could ever in the world think of. And to make a long story short, what I discovered is that the water of the fighters that's produced in the second key by heating potassium nitrate and ammonium chloride gives you a kind of aqua regia, which will dissolve gold. And in the third key, what Basil Valentine, whoever he was, is doing is he's dissolving the gold in this liquid, distilling off the liquid. What happens then at that temperature is the gold salt, the gold chloride, decomposes back into gold. So you're left with a residue of gold at the bottom. But then he does something that no modern chemist would ever think of doing. He takes his distillate and pours it back into the distilling apparatus and does it again, and does it again, and does it again. Now, a modern chemist would pretty much never do that. He did, because that's a process known as cohobation, which was very common among alchemists. What that does is if you don't do it one day and then the next day and then the third day, if you do it in rapid sequence, which he must have done, what happens is that the whole apparatus becomes filled with chlorine. And under those conditions, then with gentle heating, being very careful with regulating your heat, the gold chloride will actually sublime in an atmosphere of chlorine, which it would never do in an atmosphere that has any oxygen in it, or even nitrogen for that matter. It has to be an almost entirely chlorine atmosphere. So that must have been what this alchemist was doing in the late 16th century to make gold sublime. And that in turn makes you realize the level of competency as experimental chemists that some of these alchemists must have developed. You know, for me, it was very difficult using thermostatically controlled electrical heating. Here, these guys were doing this, tossing little bits of charcoal into a furnace for hours at a time. So it's amazing.
Okay, let's quickly summarize what we've got so far. In the first key, Valentine was describing taking impure gold and dissolving it in molten stibnite to remove the impurities and form a gold antimony alloy. This alloy was then roasted to evaporate the antimony, leaving purified gold. Then, in the second key, Valentine was describing the reaction between ammonium chloride and potassium nitrate in a retort, resulting in a form of aqua regia distilling out. Aqua regia, which is Latin for royal water, typically consists of a mixture of nitric acid and hydrochloric acid, and is one of the few things that can dissolve metallic gold. Next, in the third key, Valentine used cohobation by repeatedly distilling the aqua regia solution to leave a gold chloride residue, then pouring the distillate back over the gold chloride to redissolve it. In doing so, the gold chloride will then sublime to give red crystals. How amazing is it that Professor Principe was able to decipher all of this weirdness to give us an actual functioning chemical procedure? So where do we go from here? Well, this is where we get a bit stuck.
Well, you know, there's a big problem, potential problem, with the new historical understanding of alchemy. We see the alchemists as being really good experimentalists and really doing chemistry, yet some of them will still tell you, oh, I made the Philosopher's Stone and made so much gold. So, and we know, unless modern chemistry is sadly mistaken at a fundamental level, they were not making gold. So how do you put those two pieces together? Well, my suggestion is this, that an alchemical text that tells you how to make the Philosopher's Stone is really composed of three pieces, so to speak, three sources, three origins. One is real laboratory operations. Now, some of these operations, like the volatilization of gold, like making a mercurial tree, like doing all kinds of other things, are pretty amazing looking when you see them in the laboratory. Even to a modern chemist, I'm kind of astonished by some of the appearances of reacting materials. And this is something that I think a lot of chemists understand. Maybe non-chemists who haven't been in a lab don't see how the wow factor of chemical reactions, but it's there. So they get really excited because it looks like they're really on the way towards the Philosopher's Stone. Maybe their observations correspond with what they've written, with what they have read in an earlier text of authority, or it follows their theory. So then the next section is, okay, I've gotten this far. The theory I'm working with tells me that these next things should happen. So they're sort of extrapolating. Then often, as in Basil Valentine, as in many of these alchemical texts, the last steps, like once you've gotten the right materials, you seal them up into a flask, you heat it, it goes through a certain set of colors, black, white, yellow, red. You take it out, you melt some metal, you throw the Philosopher's Stone on it. That's all perfectly clear. Because by the early modern period, in fact, by the end of the Middle Ages, those last steps had become canonical. They'd become fixed as it comes from some authority. This is what he saw, supposedly. This is what I'm going to see. So experiment first, extrapolated theory second, and then this authoritative canonical set of steps at the end. So in a sense, the alchemists are saying, okay, we got this far. This other guy, 400 years ago, whatever, says he got to the Philosopher's Stone, so I'm tying into there, so I've virtually done it myself.
So, in all likelihood, no single alchemist ever managed to work their way continuously through all 12 keys by themselves. They got through the first 3 and then assumed that the rest was all theoretically achievable, and that was simply good enough. But who knows? Many alchemists throughout history certainly claimed to have been successful in making the Philosopher's Stone, so maybe there are hidden secrets in the remaining keys that will turn our modern understanding of chemistry on its head. So now that we've got you started, I want to present you with a challenge. The entire 12 keys text and images are fully available online. Maybe you, watching this video right now, will be the one who will finally unlock its remaining mysteries. Head over to my subreddit, r/Chemistorian, and discuss your theories with other Chemistorians. Together, we Chemistorians may be able to discover what nobody has been able to before. Basil Valentine's complete, workable method for producing the legendary Philosopher's Stone. Or maybe it's all just a load of nonsense. Either way, there's bound to be some beautiful chemistry hidden in these pages, just waiting to be discovered. Thank you to Professor Principe for all the help in making this video, and if you want to learn more, I strongly recommend his book, The Secrets of Alchemy. Also, if you want to hear our complete unedited conversation, it's fully available over at my Patreon for those in the potassium tier and above. And thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you've made it this far, please consider liking and subscribing. This video was a real saga to get through, so to celebrate posting it, I'm running a 2-week merch sale. So head over to chemistorian.dashery.com if you'd like to support the channel and get your hands on official Chemistorian merch, including this really cool radium t-shirt. It took a lot of back and forth between me and the designer to get something I was happy with, but just look at how cool this is. If you've been looking for a way to support the channel, now is the perfect time to get yourself some Chemistorian gear. Thanks so much for your support, and I'll see you in the next one.